Everybody to the basics of an IEP. My name is Kathy Dion. I'm the Executive Director for the Autism Society of Maine. And today we're joined by two parents. This is a segment from parents talking to other parents. So that's what we like about this segment. So Kathryn Dobos is joining us, Kat, and Kristen King is also joining us. And they're both parents. So they're going to go through this presentation. They will introduce themselves. And I'm gonna get off the screen so they can do it. So Kat, if you wanna share your screen, let's make sure that's working.
Yep. Let's see. Is that sharing?
Yep, we can see it.
There we go. All right, sounds good. Whoops. So welcome to today. As Kathy said, I'm a parent. I have 3 kids, one's pre-K and the other 2 are elementary school. 2 of them are on the autism spectrum. And this is just kind of coming at an IEP from a parent's perspective, and I'm hoping to explain some stuff so that you're better equipped to go into your next IEP meeting. And Kristen made our lovely slides for us.
With much help from Kat. She picked it up quite well. My name's Kristen King, and I have a 3-year-old son, Jackson, who's on the spectrum. Up until 3 months ago, I had never even heard of an IEP or seen one. So, you know, just doing this webinar with Kat, I have learned so much that I wish I would have known before going into that initial meeting. So, you know, hopefully this will help bring you some comfort and some knowledge, and just so you know that you're not alone. And, you know, as parents, we're all just trying to advocate for our kids the best we can and bring you some good stuff today.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Like we said, this is a Q&A and a PowerPoint slideshow on IEPs. So from a parent's perspective. So the first question is, what's an IEP? An IEP is an individualized education program. And there's a big definition of it there, but basically what it means is that it's a legal document and it outlines special education plans up to a year, the services needed to meet the goals, and the methods that we're going to evaluate the goals. We're going to use to evaluate the goals. Some important terms that you're going to hear throughout this is IDEA, or IDEA, is the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and this is the federal law that refers to special education and free and appropriate public education. We'll get to that term too. MUSER is our main special education regulations. And then FAPE is that free and appropriate education that I talked about, and that entitles all students access to a free and appropriate education. And at the end, there's a link to a glossary of all of these terms as well. It has a little bit more detail. So the first question is, how do we get started? Referrals can be made for an IEP through several different ways. Parents can do it, child developmental services, which is birth through 5, can do it. School personnel can do it, outside providers can do it. When I did it, I emailed our principal and said, I think it's time to look at an IEP. He answered me asking that I write out my specific concerns. I sent that back to him. He started the referral. On the school side, they use something called Child Find, and that just pulls the most at-risk kids and evaluates them to make sure that everybody's getting seen. And then once you do the referral, they go through several evaluations. There's a process for that, which we're not going to get into because of time, and that's a whole nother hour of talking. But there is a timeline for it, and that timeline is going to be dropped in the chat if the chat is working. I'm not sure if we got it working yet. If not, it will be emailed to you because we have all of your emails. It just talks about how many days from the request for the school to evaluate, how many days until they get the IEP meeting. There's a lot of timelines. The school goes by school days. So 21 days is 21 school days. That doesn't include weekends, vacations, etc. If the student's found eligible, an IEP will be developed. If the student is found ineligible, there is an appeal process. And there we go. Sorry, somehow I skipped way ahead here. Okay. If the student's found ineligible, there's an appeal process. You can look at another version or another thing called a 504 plan that also has accommodations. And you can also contact the Autism Society of Maine, and they can explain all of these things as well. So to prepare for an IEP meeting, the first thing you want to do is gather your information. This includes any information you have and that you've collected, but communication with teachers and staff. If it's phone calls, I like to follow up with an email so that I have it in writing saying what we discussed. Sometimes I even say just for my records, just so I can look back on it. I want to verify that I understood this was a conversation. Any assessments and evaluations the school does, they have to send you before the meeting, so you can look over those. You also want to write down your top 3 concerns, because going into it, especially a first IEP meeting, you're going to have lots of things that you want to tackle. They do keep them to a time constraint, so you want to look at your top 3 biggest concerns at the moment. And also write down your top 3 strengths, because they are going to talk about strengths. They should be talking about strengths. But when you are ready to fight for what your child needs and you're on the spot and they turn to you and they say, Kat, what are your child's strengths? And you go, I know they have them. It's really good to just have those right there so you can remind yourself and you can remind everybody. And then you can also bring support. And we'll talk about what support looks like on the next slide. So who is going to be there? The school will bring a gen ed teacher, administration, usually special ed teachers, and a school case manager. The school case manager is not your community case manager. Those are 2 different people. The school case manager oversees the IEP in the school. And then you can bring an Autism Society information specialist, outside therapists such as OTs if your child sees speech on the outside, counseling therapist, your community case manager can be a really good resource. You can also bring other family members. Sometimes it's really good to just have a second set of ears and somebody to remind you to take a breath before you speak. And the other important person to attend is the student, and the student should be attending their IEP meetings. In preschool and kindergarten, for us, it often looks like my student starts with an about me sheet that we have written up, and it has a picture of them. They explain their interests, their strengths, what works for them, how they need help. And that will grow to, by high school, some students lead their own IEP meetings. The student does not have to be there for the entire meeting. If there are things you want to discuss that you don't necessarily want to say in front of your student, I know sometimes it can be discouraging for the student to hear all the things they can't do. So it's okay if they leave for part of that too. Are there any questions so far? I'll give you guys a minute to think about that and put any questions in if you have them. I know that was a lot of information.
And I did end up finding the chat box is open now, so hopefully
Good.
people can type in there.
Thank you. And if you have questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to throw them out there. Kristen is watching the boxes for us.
So we have a question. If I can't make it to the IEP meeting, can they have it without me?
The school has to make every effort possible to have the parent at the IEP meeting. There are very, very few exceptions. And it's generally if the parent is just absolutely non-responsive to anything with the school, you do have to be there for it. And along with that, with the who will be there, the school has to let you know who's coming. If you show up and there's extra people there that you didn't know were coming, and that will be on your advanced written notice, which is a letter saying when the meeting is and who will be there and all of that. So if you show up and somebody's there that you didn't agree to be there, you can end the meeting right away. On the flip side, if you show up with a lawyer, the school can end the meeting right away. So it's really good to just have that open communication, but do know, because there have been times that the school has shown up with somebody that the parent didn't want there, you can stop it.
We've got another question. What is an ASM information specialist and where can I get one for my child?
Great question. So an Autism Society of Maine information specialist, you can reach out to the Autism Society of Maine and they will link you up with somebody who is just a vast resource of knowledge to get you pointed in the right direction, support you at things like IEP meetings, explain things, point you to resources. And you can find all of that on the Autism Society page. And at the end, we'll also have an email address. You can shoot them an email too, and they'll point you in the right direction. Did I get that right, Kathy, about the information specialist?
So I'm going to put in the chat box right now. If they need to contact somebody about that, I'll put it in the chat. They can email Jennifer Frey, who's actually on this meeting right now, but I'm going to put her email in there. Okay.
Perfect. Anything else before we move on? Okay, and if anything comes up, like I said, please feel free to throw it out there. Kristen can interrupt me if I'm on a roll. All right, so moving forward, my mouse is liking to double click here. Some quick tips for a successful meeting. The first thing to know is that you, as the parent, are the most valued member of your child's team. You know your child, you see your child across all settings. You live with your child, you have been through the things that don't work, you have found the successes and the things that do work. And you are not answering to the team, you are part of the team. If it's in person, grab a seat at the head of the table. It's a really powerful place to sit and it makes you feel more powerful. Take lots and lots of notes, write everything down, ask a lot of questions, ask for clarification. Often people start speaking in acronyms and abbreviations. I know I personally fall into the habit of pretending like I know what people talk about, because if they find out that I don't know what they're talking about, then they might talk down to me. That's really not a concern in IEP meetings when it comes to the acronyms and abbreviations, at least. Even school staff and people involved, they have to remind themselves about them as well. And sometimes acronyms mean something in one situation and something else in another. So speak up, ask lots of questions. The school's also legally required to explain things in a way that you understand. This means if you need an interpreter or if it's just really confusing wording, they have to present it to you so that you can understand. You can also ask to record a meeting, which is really easy when they're Zoom meetings or whatever virtual meetings. So now we're going to get into the form and the regulations and all of that. This is a lot of information coming and it is not the most exciting thing. So please, like I said, feel free to interrupt. ask questions, and we'll get going. This is the top of your IEP form. They all look the same. There's not a lot of information on it. The things to look at are the SAU or the CDS site. That's going to be your school, or CDS if they're 3 to 5. The date it's sent to the parent has to be, this is another one of those timelines, within a certain amount of time after the IEP is created at the meeting. So you can check those dates too. And all of these two are going to have this Maine Unified Special Education Requirements somewhere in each part that we're talking about. You can get a copy of the MUSER regulations from Maine Parent Federation. They will send you a printed copy. I personally like to take mine to the meetings, and that way when we're talking about things that I don't think sound quite right, I pull it out and I say, just for my information, can you show me in this where it states that? And they'll either show me and then I'll understand, or they'll change what they're saying so that it does fit those regulations. And then section 1 is basic information, name, date of birth, etc. Those dates are all going to line up with the timelines. It's really good to not assume things are correct in here. I have seen a lot of IEPs, my kids especially, with a lot of typos. And so you want to make sure the birth date is right, that the age has changed if this is an annual and not a first one, that the child's name is right. If you've moved, that the address is updated. Even if you haven't moved, that the address is right. It's just all checking that information. The next section, we come to the disabilities. So in order for a child to qualify for an IEP with their disability has to impact their academics. So if a child has autism, but it is not impacting the academics at school, they may not qualify for an IEP. And then we can go back through all of those processes that if your child doesn't qualify. I know that at the beginning I was told, we'll get the diagnosis and then we can help. So I got the diagnosis and then they were like, we still can't help because our grades are fine. So there's been a lot of sorting through that. And again, just making sure that the right thing is checked off. So before we get into some more of the more complicated stuff, are there any more questions? All right, well, we will move on, and don't be shy. Feel free to throw them out there if you have them. The next section that we're going to look at is section 3. And when you just look at this, again, it looks really super complicated. There's a lot of big words in here, a lot of boxes to check. Each of these has that MUSER regulation to look up. It's not worded well in MUSER either, but there are lots of people at the Autism Society and those information specialists that can help you sort that out as well. But what the regulations being there does is holds everybody to the same standard. So all of the schools have to fill this out the same way in Maine. And this paper, we're gonna look at kind of like a table of contents. Sorry, I lost my words there for a minute. Everything that has a yes checked will follow in another section with an explanation or an answer or what we're doing. And it's just a quick check off sheet. And again, making sure that it's correct. My son's said that he did not need assistive technology. He uses a communication device, which is assisted technology, is how he speaks. And making sure those things are checked off. They knew that, I knew that, we all knew that. Somebody checked the box wrong. Section 4 is going to have the evaluations. Section 4A is going to have the evaluations that they used to make the IEP. So if you have outside evaluations that you bring in, the school does not have to take them into consideration. They have to read them, but they can stick with only their evaluations, and the evaluations that are used for the IEP are the only ones that are going to show up here.
Before we get too far into section 4,
Yep.
we've got a 504 question. So if their academic grades are fine, would they be moved to a 504?
They can be. There are, depending on the school and what they consider their academics being fine, and that has a little bit more leeway school to school, but in the regulation and in the laws, the IEPs are for academic deficits. I have seen some really souped up 504s though that look really good and are really helpful. But like I said, that's a whole nother talk to get into that.
And who gets to define what is academically fine? That's a really good question.
Yeah. Generally, the school does. Unfortunately, a lot of the times the kids have to actually start failing or fail before IEPs are put into place.
Oh, I didn't know that. Well,
Yeah. So, for example, with my daughter, she is missing a lot of class time due to emotional and behavioral and anxiety, but she's super smart and her grades are great. So they're still looking at a 504. I'm personally making the argument that it is affecting her academics because she's not in class. So we're in that process for our own. But when we looked at it before, even though I told them this is what is probably coming, they said it has to happen first.
that's hard. No preventative to
Yeah.
try to make so it doesn't get to that point.
Some schools, if you're lucky and you have a really good team at school, those 504s can have all that preventative stuff in it. It can, if you're working on anxiety and sensory related issues and your child needs a break or a weighted blanket or headphones, those can all be addressed in 504s, and hopefully we don't have to fail first.
Mm.
Anything else before we go on? All right, so section 4B is those strengths. This should never be blank, ever. Every child has strengths. We know that deep down somewhere inside, all of the school staff also knows that. But there's no reason for it to be blank. And it does have to be filled out to be compliant. Strengths can be lots of things. They can be academic. They can be social, they can be functional, they can be that the child is a great team player on their football team. It can be, like it says here, that they have an expansive vocabulary or use word or word approximations to make requests. These are all strengths, especially in the case of a limited verbally child. It can also say that they're really great at math. It can have those academic strengths. And with strengths, the evaluations have to have all of the skills, all of the scores, whether they're high or low. You can't just pick and choose what goes on there. All right, 4. There we go. Is the needs and how statement. For every need, there should be a how statement. And I'll show you those on the next slide. But we're looking at academics, functional, developmental, and developmental. The functional goals are lifelong skill deficits that the IEP team, and remember you're part of that team, feels like the student will not outgrow. Whereas developmental, the team feels like they will outgrow. Depending on what age your child is, you will likely see more academic or more developmental, because children work on different things at different ages. There we go. So here are some samples or some examples of C is academic performance. Where are the gaps? Multiplication, division, writing organization, and how is the child impacted? Their ability to participate at grade level activities is affected. It can also say that there's no academic needs, but again, it should have something there. The only time that you will likely see that there's no academic needs is when they're young, like 3 to 5 CDS time, when we're not really evaluating academics as much as we are functional and developmental. And then they can also be super wordy, like the other one. But both are acceptable. One's just more concise, one has more information. And if you look at the bottom there, it says these areas affect participation in the general ed setting, as well as the relationship with peers. Any questions about needs and hows? All right, so the next is progress monitoring. As you can see there, it says locally determined. This means each school, each district, they decide how they're going to monitor this progress. In this case, 0 is not started. A number 1 means doesn't meet or does not meet and is less than 25%, goes the whole way up to 4 with exceeds. These will look different in different IEPs depending on where they are, but there should again be something there so we know how we're counting. You should also get progress reports at least as often as Gen Ed gets report cards. If they send them to you more, great. You can also request it to see how they're doing. And then we get to the goals.
Back to that slide real quick.
Yes.
Do you know how progress will be measured?
That will depend on each goal. Will have their own how they're going to measure, and it will be written into the goal. And again, each school does it differently too. Sometimes it might be 1 out of 4 opportunities that they do this. It might be they do it 75% of the time across all settings. And it also depends on where the child is to begin with, because we don't want to jump into this child who just received his communication device is going to use it 100% of the time in every situation. That's not a realistic goal.
Are parents given progress reports between IEP meetings? I think you had answered that they do.
They should be, depending on how often your IEP meetings are. You can also request it anytime. So currently for my son, we have an IEP meeting monthly because he has an unmet need. And so we meet every month. They tell me they haven't met that need. So I get the progress reports then. I've seen them come out often at the same time as report cards.
Have to request that each month? Do you have to request that each month to be on that where there's an unmet need?
For my son, I don't have to request it each month because I made it clear that we were going to have the IEP meetings each month. It is a little bit of a gray area as far as you have to be contacted as to what you're doing to meet that unmet need. I apologize. Somebody walked past the house. So you have to be, they have to tell you what they're doing to try to meet that need. I just got off track again. I'm sorry, I don't know what's going on with why my slides are going the wrong way. Some people do meet every month, some people do not meet every month. There we go, back on track. But they do have to tell you what they're doing to meet that unmet need. As far as if you have to reach out to request the progress reports, you shouldn't have to. But if you're not getting them, you certainly can.
So if a goal is met before the next IEP meeting is scheduled, can the parent ask for another IEP meeting to put a new goal into the IEP?
You can always request an IEP meeting. If there is something you think you need to change or address as the parent, you can request an IEP meeting anytime. Depending on how far out the IEP meeting is and what the goal is and what I want changed, I might request one sooner. If there's a lot of open communication, then you might be already talking about that anyway. If there's not a lot of communication, you might want to request the meeting. Were there any others?
I got kicked off for a second, so hopefully I caught all the questions everybody has. If I didn't, please enter it back in because I lost everything. For a second. Are there ever amendments added without an actual IEP meeting?
There should not be changes made without an IEP meeting. I say should not. So if they are happening, I would call a meeting and also reach out to the Autism Society. All right, so our goals. Again, this can get really wordy and really confusing. There is a basic standard they want the goals to be, and that is by the given date with this service, this child will do this skill and how it's measured. And that's how they should all look. So some examples. There has to be a present level of performance. That's where the child is now. So if Stella can cite contextual evidence 1 out of 4 opportunities by May 2023, given these things, Stella will do these things with this accuracy as measured by this method. I'll leave those up for a minute for you guys to look over. And the other thing to remember in goals is that these little, in the second example, it says CCS W9-10.2. That's the standard they line up with. It should be that you make the goal and find the standard that it goes with, not find the standard and make the goal work.
So where, and this is for my knowledge too, where do the standards come from? Are those?
Those are the like gen ed learning standards. Like every grade level has their learning standards. That's what they come from.
Okay. Thank you.
So looking at functional and developmental, and I put a few on here because these can look very wide and different. It can be using your AAC, which is assisted and augmentative communication device. That can be the Velcro pictures that students put on a strip. That can be pointing to something on a board. It can be as high tech as a programmable iPad type system. But those goals can certainly go in an IEP to use those. Speech goals, like the second one, go in an IEP. And coping skills and behavioral goals also can go in an IEP. Any goal questions? All right, if you think of goal questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And we'll move on to section 6, which is the aid services, modifications, and supports. And here are some examples. So many things can go on this. Structured motor breaks, access to that AAC and the equipment, adult support, choice boards, positive behavior supports, timers, transition warnings, whatever your student needs. And then if they need help in a certain subject, that also goes on here as in the bottom. A lot of the times it is written as needed, which isn't my favorite way to have it written because who determines how much is needed? Some things you just have to kind of play by ear, such as the access to adult support. You don't want to say a certain amount of time because if they're doing great, you don't want to hold them to that. If they need more, you also don't want to hold them to that. Every row, every column should be filled in if there's something in that row. So if you look at the next to last one where it says timers and transition warnings, there's nothing in location. That has to be filled in. Everything should be filled in. And the duration generally runs the same duration as the IEP. There are times that it doesn't, but most of the time it'll run with it. And then section 7 is the special education related services. This is another box like the one before where everything should be filled in. And it'll say what it is, who's responsible for providing it, where it's going to be, how often, and then the duration. The one to note here is the extended school year. So that is summer break, spring break, vacations. If your child or your student is regressing, then they have to provide those supports to maintain. They are not to progress over vacations. And so sometimes it does get a little tricky trying to keep that maintained. But those dates will look different because those dates will be the vacation dates, not the school year. Any questions for those? All right, so the least restrictive environment. This is just the environment with the least restrictions, the closest to gen ed, their peers as they can be. And this is the physical environment. So if your student is sitting in the general education science class, but has their aide helping them, that is still a least restrictive environment. It's important for schools to try the kids at the lowest level of restriction first, and then we move up. For kids 3 to 5, CDS will fill it out. So it's pretty, this is how it is. These are the hours. When you get to K to 12, there has to be a reason why they are not with the gen ed. And here are a few different examples. One is requiring more help in a certain subject. And then one of them actually lays out exactly how many minutes they're not with and why. You can see that at the bottom. Any questions on least restrictive? This is one of the places that I have seen takes more parent advocating than other places, is to really push that we need to be in the most least restrictive environment. All right. Section 9 is the post-secondary transition plan. So this is for students who are transitioning out of school, not into school, but it should be starting at 9th grade or 16, whichever comes first. And this is really important to make sure that the school is doing and that we're following it and that we're really having conversations about what we're doing next and getting ready for it. This is also another whole long conversation. There's a whole process to it. You get the students' input as to what they want to do, the parents' input. There's lots of other people who can help with job training and looking at schools, and depending on what level your student's at and what post-secondary transition looks like for them. All of our kids are very different and they have very different goals. Regardless of diagnosis, they're doing many different things after school. So
We
here
have
are
a
some-
YouTube video for that too. I'm going to try to
Oh,
stick it
yes.
in the chat.
Thanks for reminding me. So here is a quick look at some of the goals and how they might look different. So after graduation, this person might go on to attend a four-year college or university, or after graduation or after high school, this person will receive job training. And same with employment and with the independent living goals. Any transition questions? Or any questions so far? All right. Well, here's a big list of resources. The first one is the procedure manual. This is put out by DOE. It is the most easily understood of all of the things DOE puts out about IEPs, but it will walk you through a lot of what I said today, and you'll have it right there on paper, and you can reference it. The special education law is there, the Autism Society of Maine, disability rights, Maine Parent Fed, and the Disabilities, the Developmental Disabilities Council are all great resources as well. They all know a lot about this stuff too and can answer lots of questions. The special education language link is a glossary of a lot of terms laid out more easily understandable, but we are here to answer questions about them too. And the Maine Developmental Disabilities Council also has an common acronym book. So that is the IEP form. I know that went fast and that was a lot of information. So does anybody have any questions, comments?
Was everyone able to get the link, the YouTube link that I stuck in the chat? I don't know if you can see it.
I think, Kristen, when you put in the link for the YouTube, it went only to the host and the panelists. So we need to just put that in, and you got to change it so it goes to everyone.
I see.
There should be
There we
there
go.
should be a drop down. Okay, good. So I want to say thank you to both Kat and Kristen. I think this was, really great, and it allowed people to understand those basics of that IEP, which we all have been through, and it's certainly very confusing. You could talk another 2 hours on IEPs. This was kind of like The document is an important piece of an IEP meeting, and I think going through it section by section helped break it down, and I want to thank both of you for doing that. I do think when we end that everybody might be getting a survey too. So if you get the survey, please fill it out. I'm looking on my end to think, do I have to do something with that? I know I put it in there, but I'm not quite sure. It'll be a link that will say, it'll identify like an autism information specialist survey, but we're just trying to get the information if it was helpful for you. So I don't know. There was one more question though in the chat. If there is someone who can help objectively facilitate an IEP meeting if the parent and the school are having difficulties communicating. So,
Well, so Maine DOE does have people who are supposed to be objective in facilitating these disagreements. They are still part of Maine DOE. On the other hand, there are advocates out there. But if you bring an advocate, I don't know how objective they are to the school. There isn't a great answer for that right now. I find that the more you can communicate and the more you can remind everybody that we're here to support this student goes a long way. And there is an appeal process if you just absolutely are not getting what your student needs. And you can also file a complaint with Maine DOE as well, if they're not following the IEP, if something's not going right.
And I also like to remind everybody that the Autism Society also has a great lending library. And we have some books like this one right here is on all about IEPs. Very simple, very easy to use. We have another one that's the complete guide to IEPs. Our lending library is free. You can search for it online through our website. You can search by authors, by books. And then from that point, you could just request it through us. You don't have to be a paid member of the society. We also include postage to send the book back to us because we really want our material back, but it's as simple as that. And there's literally 900 different books in our library. So I wanted to put that out there.
If you think of any questions or comments after the fact, please feel free to email info@asm.org. We'll get you to the right place with the right answers. I'm going to go back to the resources page in case anybody needs to write those down.
And this will be available to rewatch, right, Kathy?
Yes, yeah, as soon as it gets up into the cloud, and then we'll go ahead and take it. And usually we send out a posting on Facebook or something saying it's ready or available, and we'll put it in our news section of our homepage of our website. So that way you'll have it and you can just click on it. So yes, it will be available for you to rewatch.
And to share with other people.
Yes.
We are coming right up on 1 o'clock. So if anybody has any other questions.
Not seeing any. I think we did well, ladies. Thank you. Thank you again for doing this. And we will remind you that we're going to do another webinar. We're trying to do them once a month. So stay tuned for April, where we'll have another one that we'll be doing where we're deciding on the topic right now. I know we want to do 504 at some point. We just weren't sure if we were doing it for next month, but we're like hoping to get them done on the fourth Wednesday or the last Wednesday. We're trying to decide that, but we'll post it. So stay tuned with that too.
And if you have anything that you want to see in a webinar or any suggestions, you can email that same info@ASM online and let us know so that we know what we can help with.
A lot of thank yous. Well done, ladies. Good job. I think we are great. And you guys should be getting an email after this is done, and I'll make sure you get your MUSA regs and your some time frames on when you should know about things. Those will go out in the email too. I have all your emails that attended, so I'll be able to get those.
Great. Thank you so much, everyone. I really did enjoy putting this together with Kristen and getting it out to you.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a nice day.